6 months later, Maple Creek Estates had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. Under James Chen's leadership, the HOA had reformed its bylaws, creating a more balanced approach that protected property values while allowing for reasonable self-expression. Solar panels now gleamed on the Andersons' roof. Mrs. Paffel's kitchen wafted delicious aromas without censure. The Rodriguez family's vegetable garden had become a neighborhood gathering spot, with families exchanging homegrown produce. And Karen Whitfield, she was perhaps the most transformed of all. On a crisp autumn morning, Karen stood in her front yard, surveying her latest project. Gone was the pristine, magazine-perfect lawn that had once been her pride. In its place, a pollinator garden bloomed with native wildflowers in a riot of colors that would have given her former self heart palpitations. "What do you think?" she asked Dennis, who stood beside her, coffee mug in hand. "It's beautiful," he said honestly, "though I'm still getting used to living with the rebel." Karen laughed, a genuine sound that neighbors had rarely heard before. "Hardly a rebel. James assures me that native gardens actually increase property values these days. Sustainability is marketable." She hadn't abandoned all her old values, just reframed them. Across the street, Mrs. Abernathy emerged from her home, heading toward Karen's yard with a purposeful stride. 6 months ago, this would have triggered Karen's fight-or-flight response, anticipating a complaint or confrontation. Today, she waved warmly. "Those echinacea are coming in nicely," Mrs. Abernathy observed, examining the purple coneflowers. "Have you considered adding some milkweed for the monarchs?" Karen nodded eagerly. "I've ordered some for spring planting. Would you like to help? I know you've got the green thumb around here." Mrs. Abernathy beamed. "I'd be delighted." When the older woman departed, Dennis slipped his arm around Karen's waist. "You never cease to amaze me. If someone had told me a year ago that you'd be planning a butterfly garden with Edith Abernathy." "Life is full of surprises," Karen mused, "including ourselves." Her phone pinged with a calendar reminder. "Oh, I need to get going. The Community Center Committee meets in 30 minutes. After resigning from the HOA, Karen had channeled her organizational talents into a different direction, renovating the aging community center. Her meticulous attention to detail, once the terror of homeowners, now proved invaluable in project management. Her knowledge of local regulations helped navigate permits and approvals with unprecedented speed. "Don't forget we have the Chens coming for dinner tonight," Dennis reminded her. James mentioned bringing that Pinot Noir we liked. It was perhaps the most surprising development of all, the unlikely friendship that had formed between Karen and her former nemesis. Their shared appreciation for structure and improvement, once a source of conflict, had become the foundation for a productive alliance. As Karen drove to the community center, she passed James dismantling the last pieces of his pool, having delayed his move after his unexpected election to HOA president. He waved, and she honked in acknowledgement. The irony wasn't lost on Karen. Her greatest defeat had somehow led to her greatest liberation. In losing her grip on controlling others, she had gained control of herself. At the community center, she was greeted with smiles rather than the wary glances of the past. People actually listened to her ideas now, not out of fear but genuine respect for her capabilities. Later that evening, as the Chens and Whitfields shared dinner on Karen's patio, an improvement she had installed without filling out a single form, James raised his glass in a toast. "To Karen," he said sincerely, "who taught us all that it's never too late to change." Karen felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Change is terrifying," she admitted. "I fought it with everything I had." "And yet," James's wife Michelle observed, "you seem happier now." Karen considered this as she looked around her yard, less perfect but more alive. At her husband, who now looked at her with the same admiration he had 20 years ago. At her new friends, who appreciated her strengths without fearing her power. 3 days later, Karen crouched behind the hydrangeas that bordered her front yard, expensive Nikon binoculars fixed on James Chen's house. The early morning dew had soaked through her designer capras, but Karen barely noticed, so intent was she on catching her nemesis in the act of some violation. Karen, what are you doing? Dennis's exasperated voice came from behind her. She jumped, nearly toppling into the shrubs. Research, she hissed. James Chen has to be breaking some rule. Nobody's perfect. Dennis sighed, checking his watch. I'm going to be late for work. Again. We need to talk about this obsession, Karen. People are talking. Let them talk, Karen muttered, adjusting her binoculars. They'll thank me when their property values don't plummet because of that man's disregard for standards. Dennis walked away, shaking his head. Their marriage had once been a partnership, but somewhere along the line, it had transformed into Dennis silently enabling Karen's neighborhood crusades while focusing on his accounting career. Lately, though, the embarrassment was becoming harder to bear. Their daughter Brittany had called from college the night before, mortified that her mother was trending in the local community Facebook groups. Across the street, Mrs. Abernathy, an 82-year-old widow who had once received a violation notice from Karen for having wind chimes that weren't an approved auditory accessory, watched the bizarre scene unfold from her window, quietly dialing her grandson, who ran a popular local news blog. By noon, Karen had abandoned her surveillance post to attend her weekly lunch with the Neighborhood Watch, a group that had once been 4 women with similar aesthetic sensibilities, but had dwindled to just Karen and her loyal friend Patricia, whose husband worked with Dennis. Everyone's against me, Patricia. Karen lamented over her Caesar salad, dressing on the side. After everything I've done for this neighborhood. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. Maybe it's time to compromise a little? James Chen seems to have a lot of support. Karen's fork froze midway to her mouth. Compromise? Did Genghis Khan compromise? Did Alexander the Great? Those aren't great examples, Karen, Patricia said gently. They were conquerors. Exactly. And Maple Creek Estates is my domain. Karen stabbed at a croton. I've given 15 years to maintaining standards. Before me, people were painting their mailboxes burgundy. Burgundy, Patricia. On the drive home, Karen spotted James Chen speaking with several neighbors in his front yard, including the Thompsons, who Karen had always counted as supporters. Furious, she accelerated into her driveway, nearly hitting her own decorative mailbox, a proved shade of forest green with gold accents. Inside, she found Dennis sitting at the kitchen table, an unusual occurrence for a weekday afternoon. Why aren't you at work? She demanded. I took the afternoon off, he said quietly. We need to talk. I don't have time. I need to prepare for the vote. Karen moved toward her home office, where she'd created an elaborate spreadsheet tracking potential votes and leverage points for each homeowner. Karen, stop. Dennis's voice was firmer than she'd heard in years. This has gone too far. I just got a call from Bob at work. The partners are concerned about my association with the situation. What situation? Dennis slid his tablet across the table. On it was a local news blog with the headline, HOAKRAN, Reign of TRO at Maple Creek Estates, accompanied by a photo of Karen hiding in her hydrangeas that morning. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. This is defamation. I'll sue. The firm won't like that, Dennis said wearily. Karen, I love you, but this has to stop. You've become different. The woman I married wouldn't spy on neighbors or call police on someone taking down their own pool. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across Karen's face. Was she really the villain in this story? No, impossible. She was the protector of property values, the guardian of aesthetic consistency. The vote is tomorrow, she said, straightening her shoulders. After I win, this will all blow over. Dennis's face fell. Karen, I've seen the message boards. You're not going to win. Something in his tone, the absolute certainty, pierced Karen's armor of self-righteousness. For the first time, real fear crept in. What would she be without her position of authority? Who was Karen Whitfield, if not the president of Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association? The question terrified her more than she could admit, even to herself. The wail of police sirens shattered the suburban tranquility of Maple Creek Estates as Karen Whitfield stood triumphantly on her perfectly manicured lawn, arms crossed over her floral blouse, watching with undisguised satisfaction as 3 police cruisers screeched to a halt in front of her neighbor's home. Her immaculately highlighted bob didn't move an inch in the summer breeze, stiffened by hairspray and righteous indignation. "That's him, officers," she called out, pointing dramatically at James Chen, who stood bewildered in his backyard, garden hose in hand. "He's destroying community property. I want him arrested immediately." James squinted in confusion. "Karen, this is my pool. I own it. I'm taking it down because we're moving next month." The lead officer approached cautiously, already sensing the familiar tension of a neighborhood dispute gone nuclear. "Ma'am, what exactly is the problem here?" Karen's face contorted with the special kind of fury reserved for perceived violations of Homeowner Association bylaws. "The problem, officer, is that the pool is reducing property values. The HOA handbook clearly states on page 47, paragraph 3, that all exterior modifications must be approved by the committee, which I chair." The officers exchanged weary glances. This wasn't their first HOA rodeo. Karen had spent 15 years perfecting her role as the self-appointed guardian of Maple Creek Estates. Her journey to HOA presidency had been calculated and relentless. After moving in with her husband Dennis and their daughter Brittany, she had quickly identified the Homeowners Association as the perfect vehicle for her particular talents. Meticulous attention to detail and an unwavering commitment to rules, especially when they could be bent to her advantage. "Ma'am," the officer said patiently, "taking down one's own pool isn't a police matter. This is a civil issue at best." Karen's jaw dropped. This wasn't following her script at all. "But he didn't file Form 27B/6. There's a process." She fumbled through her designer handbag, producing a dog-eared copy of the HOA rulebook, its margins filled with her own annotations and highlighted passages. As the officers began to retreat toward their vehicles, Karen felt her authority slipping. This wasn't acceptable. Her reputation as Maple Creek's enforcer was at stake. "I'll have your badge numbers," she called after them. "The mayor plays golf with my husband." James shook his head and returned to dismantling his above-ground pool, which had been installed long before Karen's reign began. What Karen didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that James Chen wasn't just any neighbor. He was a recently retired attorney who specialized in property law and had been meticulously documenting every one of Karen's HOA overreaches for the past 3 years. As the police cars pulled away, Karen's phone buzzed with notifications. The Maple Creek Community Facebook page was lighting up. Somehow, someone had captured the entire confrontation on video, and it was already making the rounds. Comments were pouring in, none of them supporting Karen's position. She scrolled frantically, her face growing hotter with each swipe. This wasn't right. She was protecting their investments, their way of life. Why couldn't they see that? Karen looked up to find her husband standing on their porch, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and resignation. "Karen," he called softly, "we need to talk." But Karen wasn't listening. She was already formulating her next move. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Nobody challenged her authority in Maple Creek Estates and got away with it. Nobody. "I am," she realized, somewhat wonderingly. "Though don't think this means I've gone completely soft. I noticed the Thompson's garbage cans were still out this morning, and I almost..." She mimed writing a violation notice, then laughed at herself. "Old habits," Dennis teased. "Die hard," Karen agreed, "but they do die." As night fell over Maple Creek Estates, lights twinkled from homes where people now lived with a little less fear and a little more freedom. The neighborhood wasn't perfect. No place ever is. But it had found a better balance. And Karen Whitfield, once its most feared resident, had discovered that there was life after letting go. Her lawn might have wildflowers now instead of uniform grass, but her heart had never been more orderly, more at peace. Some rules, she had learned, were made to be broken, especially the ones we impose upon ourselves. The emergency HOA meeting Karen called the following evening was meant to be her grand comeback. The community center's meeting room, with its beige walls and uncomfortable folding chairs, was packed, something that would have delighted Karen under different circumstances. Tonight, however, the unusual attendance felt ominous. As your president, Karen began, standing at the podium with perfect posture, I called this meeting to address the flagrant disregard for our community standards. If we allow one homeowner to flout the rules, where does it end? Lawn flamingos? Unmowed grass? Trash cans visible from the street? She shuddered theatrically at her own dystopian vision. From the back of the room, James Chen raised his hand. Karen pretended not to see him, but Vice President Tim Schmidt, a mild-mannered accountant who had always feared Karen's wrath, reluctantly acknowledged him. I've reviewed our HOA bylaws thoroughly, James said, his voice steady. There is no provision requiring approval for removing a structure that was installed prior to the current bylaws being implemented in 2018. My pool was installed in 2016. Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen felt her cheeks flush. Furthermore, James continued, producing a folder. I've compiled a list of 27 instances where our HOA president has selectively enforced rules against certain residents while ignoring violations by others, including herself. The murmurs grew louder. Karen's hand tightened around her gavel. That's preposterous, she snapped. As president, I have discretionary enforcement powers. Actually, interjected Samantha Wilson, a quiet woman who had received 3 violation notices for her daughter's basketball hoop, the bylaws specifically state that the president must enforce rules uniformly. Karen's world was unraveling thread by thread. For 15 years, she had ruled Maple Creek Estates with an iron fist in a garden glove. Her perfectly curated life, from her position as HOA president to her immaculate home to her reputation as the neighborhood's moral compass, was built on the foundation of control. And now that control was slipping away. I move for a vote of no confidence in President Whitfield, said James, his words landing like a bomb in the stunned room. I second, Samantha added quickly. Karen's husband Dennis, who had always supported her reign from the shadows, stared at his shoes, offering no defense. This is completely out of order. Karen sputtered, we have procedures. But the room had already transformed. The neighbors Karen had terrorized for years with violation notices for minor infractions. A holiday decoration left up too long, a trash can not brought in by sunset, an unapproved shade of beige, now saw an opportunity for liberation. The vote was scheduled for the next meeting. Karen stormed home, her mind racing with strategies. She would not go down without a fight. She began making calls to her few remaining allies in the neighborhood, promising favors, suggesting dirt she had on certain residents could be forgotten if they supported her. That night, as Dennis slept beside her, Karen stayed awake plotting. She would dig up anything she could on James Chen. Everyone had skeletons, and Karen had made a career of neighborhood espionage. Tomorrow, she would begin surveillance. She'd catch him in violation of something, anything, and use it to discredit him before the vote. What Karen didn't realize was that her increasingly desperate behavior was being noticed. The neighbors she thought were loyal were quietly distancing themselves. The community she thought she controlled was slipping through her fingers like the fine sand of the playground she'd had removed because children were too noisy. The war had just begun, and Karen was already losing ground. The evening of the vote arrived with an atmosphere of tension unlike anything Maple Creek Estates had experienced since the Great Gazebo debate of 2015. The community center parking lot overflowed, forcing latecomers to park along the tree-lined streets, a parking violation that Karen would have pounced on in different circumstances. Karen arrived 15 minutes early, as was her custom, wearing her power outfit, a navy blue blazer with gold buttons, crisp white blouse, and pearl necklace. Dennis had offered to accompany her, but she'd refused. This was her battle. Good evening, Karen, James Chen said politely as she entered, extending his hand. Karen stared at his outstretched palm as if it might bite her. Mr. Chen, she acknowledged stiffly, brushing past him. The meeting room was already filling up. Karen noticed unfamiliar faces, residents who had never before attended HOA meetings. Some avoided eye contact. Others watched her with undisguised curiosity, as if she were an exhibit at the zoo. Word had spread beyond Maple Creek Estates. This was now community theater. Vice President Tim called the meeting to order, his voice quavering slightly. Before we proceed to the vote of no confidence, President Whitfield has requested 5 minutes to address the association. Karen approached the podium, clutching a folder containing her prepared remarks, a meticulous defense of her record, and a scathing critique of James Chen's anarchist agenda. But as she looked out at the sea of faces, neighbors she'd lived alongside for years, something unexpected happened. Karen froze. In the third row sat the Andersons, whose request to install solar panels she'd blocked for aesthetic inconsistency. Behind them, the Rodriguez family, who had wanted to plant a vegetable garden in their backyard, but were denied because food production is agricultural, not residential. Near the door, Mrs. Patel, who had received multiple violations for the scent of curry emanating from her home during cooking. Faces upon faces, each with their own story of frustration, fear, or resentment, all caused by her. Karen began, her voice uncharacteristically small. I have always believed that maintaining property values was the highest goal of our community. The words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. But perhaps, she continued, veering off her prepared script, I've been overzealous in my methods. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Karen gripped the edges of the podium. This wasn't how she planned the speech, but something was compelling her forward. The truth is, when Dennis and I moved here 15 years ago, I was terrified. The murmuring stopped. Every ear in the room was tuned to this unexpected confession. We'd invested everything in this house. I grew up poor, moving from apartment to apartment. Maple Creek was my first real home, and I was desperate to protect it. Over time, that desperation morphed into something else. Karen's voice cracked. In the back of the room, Dennis had appeared, watching his wife with a mixture of surprise and something else. Pride? I still believe in standards, Karen said, regaining some of her characteristic steel. But I recognize now that community is about more than uniform lawn heights and approved exterior paint colors. It's about people. She took a deep breath. I withdraw from the vote of no confidence and hereby resign as president of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. The room exploded in chaos. Karen stepped away from the podium, feeling strangely lighter than she had in years. As she walked down the center aisle toward the exit, residents moved aside, some nodding in acknowledgement, others still processing the shocking turn of events. At the door, James Chen stood waiting. That was unexpected, he said quietly. Yes, well. Karen smoothed her blazer. I've never been predictable, Mr. Chen. He smiled slightly. What will you do now? It was a question Karen hadn't considered until this moment. Without her HOA presidency, who was she? I don't know, she admitted, the words unfamiliar on her tongue. But I suspect I'll have more free time for living.